Sleep-deprived, parched, and starved, through the crawl of endless days, war becomes a hallucination, a dream in which I die.
It sucks that you're here.
She grabbed his hand, staring intensely into his eyes, her face illuminated by a smile tinged with distant love. A wave of conflicting emotions overwhelmed Kirienko, a politician usually so resolute and self-assured. It was his ex-wife. It was as if he still loved her. Kirienko regained his senses. The ghosts of his past briefly occupied fragments of his present. He relived a distant feeling of warmth, only to be abruptly dragged back to reality, to the basement of his dacha. The reminiscence snapped shut, giving way to the agonizing reverie of the physical world. The time-darkened memories dissipated, and the emptiness became palpable. His teeth ground and chattered, his breathing erratic, sporadic. With every exhalation, a slow groan escaped him. A thread of saliva stretched from his mouth, steadily creeping toward the dust-covered floor.
What did you see?
Kirienko began to bash the back of his skull against the wooden beam to which his body was tightly bound. The first strike, the second strike. He stopped. Georgi followed the movement with his eyes, waiting for what would come next. Third strike. A cry of despair. Heavy tears now adorned Kirienko's face, falling and pattering against the ground, leaving dark spots in the dust. They cascaded like diamonds poured from one jewelry box into another. Fourth strike. Fifth strike. Sixth strike. Georgi stood up, grabbed the cushion from beneath him, and wedged it between the beam and Kirienko's head.
You finally feel the despair that the people you are supposed to represent endure. Day after day, week after week. You finally weep out of anguish. Just like the families shattered by the war you helped unleash. You were one of the cogs at the very least. You are going to fully comprehend the consequences of your actions. The bitter fruit of your politics, you piece of shit.
At that moment, caught by a sound, Georgi's eyes locked through the basement window onto the trunk of a weeping willow growing in the dacha's garden. A green woodpecker clung to it, repeatedly drumming into the thick bark. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pause. A beautiful rhythm. Certainly better than the one Kirienko had just produced with his empty head, Georgi judged.
It is man who creates ideas, but it's the ideas that possess him. It's high time to change yours.
Kirienko did not hear this last sentence. He plunged back into his hallucinations. Georgi observed the silhouette of the man, now silent and motionless. He was probably too thirsty. The dose of tea hadn't been properly tailored to his needs.
Stop these images. Stop these visions, please. I can't go on.
Don't worry, you'll survive. It's just a little intoxication.
He returned to his seat, placing the cushion once again under his buttocks. Kirienko snapped his eyes open. He was sweating and trembling.
Where are your balls? Face your fears. It's the only way through.
His monotonous voice reached Kirienko with a delay. The politician no longer had control over his hearing. He finally closed his eyes. Lines, an endless system of pipes, stacked and tangled. A labyrinth whose end was a pulsating cross. A cross made of flesh that turned gangrenous, bled, shriveled, huddled, and bled even more. Through a deafening silence, a voice screamed.
Jesus still suffers for your sins. You killed him, and you drank his blood, and you ate his flesh. He never resurrected. He still suffers for your sins. He suffers forever because of you.
Kirienko noticed dots on the floor, large ones and small ones, his tears and his sweat. These dots multiplied and weaved through space. Another line appeared, this one composed of dots that vanished, reappeared, and vanished again. Kirienko thought they represented human lives.
I see everything, but I have to get out. I have to get out of this.
Don't worry. After every storm, the calm returns. And the greater the storm, the more serene the calm.
You're an executioner.
If I am an executioner, my tortures resurrect. They do not kill. Look at your tears. They are pure, sincere. A piece of corrupt rot like you has never been less repulsive.
Go fuck yourself, asshole.
Georgi said nothing. Silence is the worst punishment, especially for someone hallucinating on psilocybes. It forces you back into yourself. Prologue. The Beguiling Serpents. 2 months earlier.
Ukraine was created by Lenin. Seriously, did you hear that?
That had to be the most unhinged history lesson I've ever heard. The guy should teach at our school. His speeches would kill it there.
And Putin claims to defend Orthodox values, yet he cheats on his wife with a younger woman, gets a divorce and hides his illegitimate kids. He's a shameless hypocrite. He lacks the stature that inspires others to follow, the kind that makes a true leader.
Georgi, Navasard, and Sergei had been classmates since middle school, in a small town in southern Russia, near the Caucasus Mountains. Now in their final year of high school, they had made a habit of hanging out after class at Sergei's family restaurant, newly opened after years of renovation, just down the block. On the 22nd of February 2022, Russia took its first step into a new world by declaring the Donbass part of the Russian Federation. Yet, a much grander event was brewing. All of Europe waited. The Russians waited differently, holding their breath, their eyes glued to the horizon. There was something in the air, a growing restlessness that became increasingly tangible. And 2 days later, dark clouds gathered beyond the horizon. These boys, whose rebellious spirits and aspirations stretched far beyond the confines of any political regime, found themselves facing a dilemma, one that, upon closer inspection, wasn't a dilemma at all. They knew they had to act, regardless of the consequences, because living in a world now corrupted by the blood of innocents so close to home proved to be a far worse option than perishing while trying to fix it.
Sir, philosophy is your major. Tell me, how do we face a disaster of this magnitude? Seriously, man, how?
By following your moral compass and acting on your own scale.
I refuse to live in a fascist state, or a pseudo-fascist plutocracy. The terminology doesn't matter. Those assholes won't get me. Not my body, not my mind.
But what can we actually do to push things in the right direction?
You ask a lot of questions. That must be your major.
On the contrary, you ask 0 questions in sports. Gosha, are you still prepping for the final chemistry exam?
Yeah? Why?
Navasard shrugged. He was an inquisitive boy who perpetually asked questions, marveling at the world he inhabited and the circumstances that had brought him this far. It was an insatiable curiosity that, in his view, unlocked hidden, unexpected, and even ingenious truths. He remained silent for a few moments, then spoke up.
Do you remember the conclusion you came to after, well, your experiments?
They looked at each other. On the day of his clinical death, new truths had revealed themselves to Georgi. A car had hit him at the age of 13, an event that abruptly severed the current of his adolescence. In the hospital, he had seen God. He spoke magical words that materialized into reality, and all around his head were eyes. The Orthodox God, whom Georgi held as a reference in his imagination and unconscious, possessed the same capacity for speech, but his image resembled no deity he had ever seen before. The being Georgi saw in his dream that day was not human, though he looked like one. Nothing escaped him. His gaze bore down on everything, judging everything around him without exception. His presence carried weight. It could be felt from afar, even when turning one's back to him. Omnipresent and omniscient. Not a classic old man, but a slender young man capable of both creation and annihilation. His posture left a lasting mark on Georgi. He woke up a week later. A soft spring sun caressed him through the hospital window. His entire family was waiting by his bedside. Sergei and Navasard joined them a few hours later, bewildered by the ordeal that had just ended. Amazed, lost in his non-existing thoughts, Georgi gazed at a blossoming cherry tree through the glass. The gentle caresses of the sun carried him from a nightmare into a daydream. The beauty of the whole world seemed to rest at the tip of his index finger. A nurse entered the room. The whiteness of her blouse blinded Georgi. He saw her as an angel coming to save him and to change his urinal. Georgi smiled at her and whispered,
I love you.
It mattered little that this angel weighed at least 250 pounds. Georgi was still delirious. Doctors came and went. Nurses spoke to him before vanishing too. Sergei and Navasard read him the class notes he had missed. His mother and grandmother argued, shooting him anxious, sporadic and occasional glances. Other classmates dropped by, some looking both worried and relieved, and others with genuine tears and trembling voices, though poorly acted sometimes. Georgi's eyes barely moved, still empty, desperately searching for a meaning to live. There was, somewhere in the fog of his vision, a girl sitting near the bed. A scar ran along her throat, tracing the jugular vein. He wanted to tell her she was beautiful, that this scar was proof of her luck, that the jugular vein was one of the largest and most important in the human body, and that severing it was lethal. But aside from his confession of love to the nurse, his angel, he didn't utter a single word those days. He was lost in a thick fog. On the neighboring bed, he noticed an elderly man with his leg in a cast. At his bedside sat a woman, equally old. They reassured each other that everything would be fine, despite the fact that they'd had to sell their only cow to finance the urgent surgery. Their gentle worries pierced his consciousness, bringing a semblance of normalcy to this alien environment. He listened to them talk about their farm, their children and grandchildren, their hopes for the future. Their stories, their laughs, and their tears created a bubble of warmth and humanity within the sterile coldness of the hospital. Georgi let himself be lulled by their voices, clinging to their reality so as not to sink into his own darkness. 2 days later, Georgi got to his feet and slowly, with difficulty, walked. Navasard came and supported him by the arm. They made their way to the exit, the cold corridors of the pediatric oncology ward, then the smell of concentrated bleach and the hubbub at the reception, and finally, the spring breeze. It caressed Georgi's pale cheeks. They stepped forward into the light. Georgi kept his eyes on his feet to avoid stumbling. He noticed the shadows of the tree leaves above him, invisible to his eye, painting golden patterns on the ground. These shapes undulated peacefully and gracefully at the mercy of the wind. They took a seat on a bench near the hospital entrance. Georgi shared his comatose hallucination with Navasard, first in dissociated fragments, then weaving a common thread through them. Above all, he wished to express his gratitude to Navasard, to his loved ones, to his family, but struggled to find the appropriate words. Their presence during the most difficult ordeal he had ever faced bestowed an inestimable value upon his life experience, and he felt it. Yet he only kept repeating that he understood now, that if he managed to let go, things would naturally fall into place. Still weakened, Georgi turned his head toward Navasard, his friend of a few years now. They had met shortly after Navasard's arrival at their middle school. Both had made a habit of running on the school track after classes. The new student spoke little Russian. He communicated mostly in Romani and Armenian, a language of which he retained a few notions from his early childhood, before his parents rejected him and sold him to Romani travelers. It wasn't until a decade later that Navasard's maternal grandmother tracked him down in an orphanage in the Bucharest suburbs. He was 12 at the time. Navasard's level of Armenian was sufficient for Georgi. who discovered during their exchanges his new friend's love for Armenian cuisine, particularly dolmas. That worked out perfectly. Georgi's mother made them wonderfully. Upon opening the Tupperware offered by Georgi, the aroma of the stuffed vine leaves transported Navasard to an unexpected place, deep into his childhood, where his mother cooked and his father set the table, where the whole family gathered around those same scents. In return for this gesture, Navasard introduced Georgi to boxing. Their bond had grown stronger through shared moments like these. Georgi took a moment to reflect on the history of their budding friendship. He told himself he was living his own version of paradise, well surrounded and appreciated, and that his two best friends would never have met without him. He felt incredibly lucky. He could now almost discern the underlying thread connecting all objects, animate and inanimate, across all the past and present events that concerned him. Around Georgi, everything he saw connected in a strange yet logical, undoubtedly deterministic way, aligning with his intimate, unshared thoughts. His reflections led him to the dawn of the universe, to the law of conservation of mass, and to the way everything around him was made of atoms existing since the beginning of time. Navasard, sitting across from him, was composed of the exact same elements and molecules that created everything else in our world. Georgi realized in that instant just how profound the connection between us all was, reaching far beyond arbitrary emotions. From the most invisible, microscopic bacteria dwelling in thermal vents at the ocean's deepest depths, to the birds traveling thousands of miles to give birth to the next generation. Georgi saw himself in each of them, as if he had explored their world, as if, overwhelmed by the experience of venturing so far outside himself, he were observing our world through the eyes of another. A part of his ego was destroyed. Everything seemed both identical and different. Until then, Georgi had felt isolated, friendly with a few classmates but lacking passion, alone. That feeling was completely abolished when he realized that what he saw with his own eyes was exactly the same world everyone else observed. The only difference lay in the conclusions drawn from those observations. He could choose to see the beauty in the way the trees above him painted golden shapes with their foliage, or in the sun's caresses that had woken him from his coma. If, indeed, beauty was in the eye of the beholder, then it was everywhere. One only had to look around, toward the heavens, on the ground, near the trees, out the window. Even the most repulsive aspects of human life concealed charm and delicacy. Choosing to prefer beauty did not, however, imply an ignorance of life's apparent darkness. It was about refocusing one's attention, refusing to let the bleak sides of existence extinguish the light within oneself or within any creature of the everyday. It was about reclaiming control over one's free will, about remaining fair and grateful despite the human condition. Over the following months, Georgi bid farewell to the elderly couple and gradually recovered. He also immersed himself in books dealing with psychic alchemy and the chemical alteration of cerebral biology. Works both recent and ancient, translated or studied in Russian, those of Dale Pendle, Daniel Pinchbeck, and Alexander Shulgin, as well as Fitzhugh Ludlow or Weston Labarre, occupied his days and nights. On the way to school or back, during recess or before falling asleep, he lost himself in reading, drawn to shamanic practices and their scientific derivatives. These texts, sometimes complex and arduous, offered him an escape, a way to understand and give meaning to what he had experienced. They allowed him to travel through the ideas and experiences of others, to comprehend their discoveries and their mistakes. And the more he read, the more he realized the immensity of the realm of possibilities, the irreproducible complexity and beauty of the human brain. He discovered, notably, that it was Marduk who had visited him in the coma, a Mesopotamian god whose existence he had been entirely ignorant of. At the same time, Georgi threw himself into the exploration of Jungian theory, learning about mythology, collective memory, and archetypes, narratives shared across eras, places, and populations. For instance, the shared cosmology surrounding the ritualized use of psychotropics proved, little by little, to be a well-kept historical fact. In particular, the rites of North Eurasian cultures incorporated the Amanita muscaria, a hallucinogenic mushroom. The ancient Ugrian peoples, or the Siberians and Finns of today, perceived it as a gateway to the beyond. The Kalevala, Finland's national epic, gathers some 24,000 verses of epic poetry that preserve millennial oral traditions and form the foundation of Finno-Ugric mythology. A recurring element in these tales is the Sampo, a magical object guaranteeing prosperity to its keeper. The etymology of the word Sampo shares similarities with Soma from Hindu tradition, also referred to as Amrita in the Vedas, the sacred texts of Hinduism and Brahmanism, evoking a ritual beverage comparable to the ambrosia of Greek mythology. The term Sampo derives from the Sanskrit word skamba, meaning pillar, reflecting the shared cosmological framework of Finno-Ugric and Siberian shamanism, characterized by a central pillar and 3, 5, 7, or 9 adjacent levels, a structure similar to the chakra system in Hinduism. Siberian shamans placed particular value on Amanita muscaria, marked with 7 white dots, symbols of the 7 stars of the Ursa Major constellation. From this perspective, the inverted bowl shape of the mushroom evokes the celestial dome. This cosmological conception of the Sampo and the Soma also bridges the gap between Indo-European shamanic practices and Scandinavian mythology with its Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree. Yggdrasil anchors itself in our world through 3 roots. One of them plunges toward the ancient primordial void. Beneath this root lies a well containing wisdom and intelligence. By drinking from this well, Odin acquired the wisdom he coveted, but it cost him an eye. Indeed, through his research, Georgi was weaving a web, a constellation of ancient beliefs scattered across a vast geographic area, from Greece to Finland, Siberia, and India. He also ran into a proliferation of doubts, an abundance of lingering questions with no obvious resolutions. Within this intellectual labyrinth, the case of Daniel Pinchbeck stood out, a New York journalist who engaged in the experimentation of psychotropics, guided by shamans from around the globe, from the Amazon to sub-Saharan Africa. He notably recounted the experience of Bwiti, an initiatory rite centered around iboga practiced by the peoples of Central Africa, which had triggered visions of imminent death in a member of his group, Dan Lieberman, a South African botanist. Together they had traveled to Gabon, driven by the desire to submit themselves to this tradition, which consisted of chewing the bark of iboga, a tropical tree, inducing a deep trance lasting around 30 hours. At the end of the ceremony, the botanist confided that he had very little time left to live. This revelation had plunged him into a profound melancholy. A few months after his return to New York, Daniel received an email from Dan's parents. He had died in a car accident on a flat stretch of highway. He had been sleeping in the back seat. He died in his sleep at his 33rd birthday. Certain avant-garde researchers like Paul Stamets maintain that the human being shares more similarities with fungi than with any other kingdom of organisms. According to them, man stems from a common ancestor with the mushroom, an evolutionary divergence that occurred some 650 million years ago. They highlight the macroscopic resemblance between human and fungal cells, observing that, much like humans, mushrooms breathe oxygen and expel carbon dioxide. Furthermore, the consumption of psilocybes, hallucinogenic mushrooms, improves the functioning of serotonin as a neurotransmitter, stimulates neurogenesis, and strengthens neural connections. Normally, our brain establishes roughly 40 new neural connections per second, but under the influence of psilocybes, this number exceeds 150, which promotes not only the formation of new neurons, but also the repair of existing networks. The ability of psilocybes to trigger neurogenesis constitutes one of the plausible explanations for the emergence of consciousness in Homo sapiens, a species that repeatedly consumed these substances and survived. The American philosopher Terence McKenna dubbed this hypothesis the stoned ape theory. This theory raises a fundamental question. Why did the volume of the human brain increase, at a given moment, from 300 to 400 cubic centimeters to 1,200 to 1,500? From an evolutionary standpoint, such an expansion wasn't strictly indispensable for the species' survival. Indeed, human consciousness, although complex and unique, does not confer an obvious biological advantage within the framework of evolution. Darwinian theory, in essence, focuses on biological and physiological mutations, such as the development of the brain and nervous system. However, attempting to explain consciousness solely through biological processes runs into numerous difficulties. Reducing consciousness to physical processes amounts to ignoring its deep and subjective dimensions, thus adopting a reductive and incomplete view of human evolution. In the context of attracting mates, displaying one's health and strength, as peacocks do with their tails or stags with their antlers, cannot be compared to the utility of human consciousness. Effectively, consciousness remains an internal, complex structure, impossible for potential mates to evaluate directly. Assessing such an attribute would even be time-consuming and energy-draining, precious resources in a survival context. Moreover, the increase in cerebral volume implies considerable energy expenditures. A larger brain requires more calories to function, and a pregnancy associated with such a brain imposes far more complex physiological changes. These costs can constitute a perilous disadvantage. In reality, if the sole function of a large brain was to increase attractiveness to mates, its biological cost outweighs the potential benefits, thus reducing its probability of evolutionary spread. Furthermore, in the animal kingdom, examples of complex consciousness are extremely rare or poorly developed. No species has been observed with a level of abstract thought comparable to that of humans. The very probability of the emergence of consciousness and the development of such complex capacities is so minuscule on our planet or elsewhere that it seems to be the exception rather than the rule. Besides, sophisticated social interactions can develop without a significant increase in brain size. Many species, such as certain primates, wolves or dolphins, exhibit elaborate social behavior without possessing large brains. The stoned ape theory suggests that the prolonged consumption of hallucinogens could explain certain scientific inconsistencies by stimulating neurogenesis in primates over the long term. With mushrooms, we thus find ourselves before an instrument of capital importance. Even penicillin, which revolutionized the course of the Second World War in favor of the Allies, was in fact a simple fungus that nonetheless marked a decisive turning point because, at that time, the majority of deaths were attributable to infections. Fungi also proved to be surprisingly omnipresent. They account for 30% of the soil's biomass. In fact, for a single meter of a tree root, one can find up to a kilometer of mycelial networks, essential to biodiversity and the health of ecosystems. Some mycologists even emphasize the intelligence of fungi. As an example, the Physarum polycephalum, a single-celled fungus, demonstrates the ability to navigate mazes while optimizing energy conservation. Japanese scientists modeled the Tokyo Metropolitan Transit Network as a maze, where each station was symbolized by a piece of oat, this fungus's preferred food. After 28 hours of exploration, it reorganized the network in a way that made it even more efficient than the actual layout of the Tokyo subway. In their natural habitat, mycelial networks develop by locating a food source, often consisting of organic matter present in the soil. Once this source is found, they secrete an enzyme that breaks down the organic matter in order to consume it. This process, while nourishing the fungus, also helps regenerate and purify the soil by eliminating pollutants. Beyond fungal nutrition, this property is exploited for environmental repair and bioremediation. Decomposed biomass transforms into compost, enriching the soil with essential nutrients for surrounding plants. Mycelial networks primarily attack dead trees and insect carcasses, thereby contributing to the formation of self-sustaining ecosystems. Mushrooms, therefore, possess the power to nourish, heal, kill, and open new horizons all at once. Moreover, their dispersion is achieved with remarkable astuteness. Psilocybin spores cling to the feathers of cattle egrets, which transport them to other favorable lands, sometimes thousands of kilometers away, at the mercy of their migrations. Looking beyond hallucinogenic fungi, Antonin Artaud, the French theater theorist, actor, and writer, traveled to Mexico in 1936 to immerse himself in peyote rituals, making use of a hallucinogenic cactus practiced by the Tarahumara Indians. He described them as seekers of metaphysical knowledge through immediate pathways, at the very heart of the natural. Emerging from a state of such vision, one can no longer confuse a lie with the truth, he wrote. He added that he now saw where he came from and who he was, that he recognized his origins and his essence, unshakable against any external emotion, influence, or distraction. A decade later, Antonin Artaud passed away in a psychiatric asylum under the yoke of electroshock treatments, gripped by paranoia, unable to reconcile with the void within him that the peyote had unveiled. Aldous Huxley, an eminent thinker and author of Brave New World, was captivated by psychotropic substances. He envisioned them as agents capable of fostering individual liberation and exerting social control. He believed, notably, that mescaline and LSD could offer psychiatrists the means to triumph over mental illness, or, to a dictator, the means to eradicate freedom. Huxley died in 1963. On his deathbed, his wife administered a considerable dose of liquid LSD, precipitating him into a definitive journey, a voyage of no return. For Georgi, the first ingestion of psilocybes took place when he was 15, one morning, in an empty house. Georgi took a so-called heroic dose, which slightly exceeded the limit for his body weight recommendation. He knew. His research came first, despite a possible psychosis. This initial experience, unlike the ones that would follow, was not documented in writing. Emotions overwhelmed him. His skull felt ready to explode. He shoved 2 fingers into his mouth, pressed on his tongue, then irritated his uvula but vomited nothing. He called Sergei and explained that humans did not deserve these mushrooms, that nature herself was manifesting within them, that they shouldn't be inside him, that he felt compelled to extract them from his body, otherwise he would disappear. Sergei uttered his reply. The phone immediately slipped from Georgi's hand, and his entire body crashed to the floor, sprawling onto the rug, curling into a fetal position. He began to cry. Time passed differently. Hours were minutes, and seconds were eternity. He could hear Sergei's distant, robotic voice assuring him from the phone that everything would be okay. Suddenly, Georgi became convinced of his own death. He was dead in an alternate reality, the one where he never woke up from his coma. He was absolutely certain of it. From now on, he lived in that reality, and no other. He was already dead, forgotten, forevermore. A paralyzing anxiety flooded him. He tried to stand, dropped to his knees, took his head in his hands, threading his fingers through his hair, lowering his head. The tip of his nose curved against the rug, inhaling and exhaling the dust. He felt a primordial fear, a nameless terror, the kind that visits only once in a lifetime, that engraves itself in the memory, that scars it and then becomes a part of the soul. Loneliness and lack of love. Georgi understood that we are all babies. We all essentially need a little affection, a little love, a few words of encouragement, quite simply. Loneliness and despair. These emotions grew heavier and heavier. He could no longer manage the visual hallucinations. The patterns of the Turkmen rug before him danced. He raised his head. The beige and white shades of the wallpaper dripped down the walls, onto the floor, pooling around his knees. Loneliness and madness. He had to get out of it, find an anchor, grab hold of it. Suicide. After all, he was already dead. Loneliness and panic. The survival instinct stopped him from throwing himself out the window. It wouldn't help anyway. He lived in a 1-story house. He stayed on the rug, motionless. He was trapped in this hell, a living dead. A voice reached him and dispelled his solitude. Sergei kept repeating that everything would be okay. The dive into the universe of death and loneliness, where the most repressed and remote memories resided, began to slow down. Georgi suddenly imagined a mirror, and inside it, a childhood friend, then his first love, and finally a woman. She looked like his mother. The faces were theirs, but the stories, the souls, belonged to others. Georgi clung to the voice on the phone, closer to the world of the living.
Sir, thank you for being here for me.
Don't worry about it. What's the point of having friends if not to help them out in times of distress?
You didn't just help me out. You saved me.
Listening to this story for the first time, Navasard commented that he understood, that he recalled hallucinating on morphine when, after a boxing match, his chin was dislocated and he was rushed to the ER. Navasard had been boxing for as long as the three of them had known each other. Over the years, his body became an antique paragon, a symbol of dedication, passion, restraint, strict discipline, and consecration to the ideal of masculine beauty historically put forward. With perseverance and motivation, he strove to replace physical inability and spiritual decrepitude, to sharpen the tool nature bestows upon us, the one that fades with time, ultimately devoured by the earth. But the image of a perfect body is metaphysical, eternal. It remains, it is venerated, respected, like statues guarded in museums, dusted with fine brushes, with care and consideration. Navasard advocated balance through categorization, his term for designating the golden mean. According to him, the power of the mind should in no way prevail over that of the body. The physical complements the intellectual and the spiritual, and vice versa. He went on to analyze the types of physique and intellect. One cannot be satisfied with solely practicing martial arts, or merely running, or focusing exclusively on muscle building. A balance between these activities is essential. In the same way, one cannot be interested only in philosophy, or solely in mathematics, or devote oneself exclusively to languages. An ordered harmony among these disciplines leads to self-expression and personal development at a superior level, unattainable for the majority. Indeed, despite his young age, Navasard's life had sharpened his restraint and his social grace. Before his grandmother found him, he had lived in an orphanage in Romania. According to him, the Romani people there were cruel, vile, and evil. They taught him how to survive and how to work. He became a debt collector at the age of 10. Nobody considered a little boy a threat. Over time, he acquired a reputation in his field, notably thanks to his persuasion techniques. He spoke little, he mostly listened. If what he heard turned into gibberish adorned with invalid excuses, he dislocated a finger, then another, and another, if the excuses persisted. With experience, he developed this know-how and learned to completely control the debtor's pain level. A waitress entered the boys' field of vision at a restaurant's table. The space around them metamorphosed, giving rise to new emotions. The aromas of melted goat cheese, still hot, a few bubbles whispering lightly on a golden crust, freshly prepared and baked over a wood fire, shaped like an elongated boat, with an egg in the middle. And, in the waitress's right hand, a small carafe of Georgian wine. The three boys stared at her with affection. Employed at Sergei's family restaurant for only a few months, young Lena had managed to win over the hearts of the Kaprelidze family. Sergei's mother, the head chef at this restaurant, found Lena's help in preparing the dishes invaluable. Sergei's father was thrilled to have hired her, as the clientele had noticeably multiplied since her arrival. Customers appreciated the sweet and innocent smile with which she brought the orders, like an angel coming to save them from hunger and thirst, brightening the day, garnishing the dish, becoming its beautiful beginning, perhaps even its very essence.
3 Adjarian khachapuris and some wine. Drink in moderation, just like your father taught you, Sergei.
She threw a half-scolding, half-benevolent glance into each boy's eyes, then retreated toward another table. Sergei poured the wine. They leaned over their plates, eager to savor their meal. Georgi grabbed the khachapuri by the dough, bit into it, and swallowed a piece of juicy egg yolk, tender cheese, and soft bread. Navasard tore off a large chunk with his fingers, dipped it in the egg yolk, and quickly directed it into his mouth. Sergei, methodical, took a fork and knife, maneuvered them skillfully, and tasted the dish with delight, deeply considering this first bite. All three sighed with pleasure. The atmosphere suddenly became warmer. For a brief moment, they forgot the gravity of the subjects they were discussing and the austerity of the winter they were traversing.
I know what we're going to do. We have to start with the local deputies.
He took a long sniff of the wine, then brought the glass to his lips.
Everything begins and ends with them.
We have access to them, at any rate. The town is small. Everyone knows everyone. Through the neighborhood or family. Through friends or colleagues. Thanks to your contacts, Sergei, we'll be able to penetrate their private circles. With your muscles, Navasad, we'll tame them. And finally, with my hallucinogenic potions, we will correct them.
In a war, there is no gray area. You are either in one camp or the other. No in between, no middle ground. As soon as you adhere to a camp, you become a part of it, and you do everything to ensure that camp wins.
Which is exactly why we have to act the way only we know how.
These propagandists, these liars, these sinners, spreading messages of war, of unconditional hatred, of fratricide. I despise them. I want to see them suffer the way they make an entire population suffer. I want to inflict upon them what they deserve for their actions and inactions, their words and their silences. Their agony won't be physical, though. It will be worse. It will be spiritual. It will haunt them. It will metamorphose them. The entire pro-war political chain will be affected, infected by the virus of doubt and fear. We can strike the head if we reach the neck.
But we can only start at the feet.
Georgi gave him a silent thumbs up, his mouth occupied with wine. The countless images of the war and the misery soaked in tears and despair had touched everyone at that table. Their ideals and perspectives were shaken, challenged. Gradually, their voices of conscience fell silent. They no longer whispered words of consolation. They no longer deluded them regarding vicious acts. The invasion of Ukraine created the evil that responsible politicians propagated and scattered into the hearts of the Russian population. This evil was now transforming the lives of 3 lost boys in the North Caucasus. It made them rise, act, and take revenge against destiny, the universe, God. On the horizon, on the border of the known and the unknown, another world was emerging, the one where they would grow up and become actors in historical events. The determination to implement their unique skills to influence the local political landscape for the common good was growing. They knew the road would be long and fraught with pitfalls, but together they were convinced they could make a difference. Their animated discussions and innovative ideas only intensified their resolve and their commitment to the cause.
Journalists, artists, poets, writers, all those who experimented with psychedelics shared a non-conformist rejection of materialistic interpretations of the world before embarking on a non-materialistic quest. They were willing and consenting, but our plan is different. We will cure corrupt politicians by forcibly subjecting them to psychotropic substances.
I think we have to try anyway. It's up to us to push the boundaries, to explore, to be visionaries.
It's true that fairly recent research revealed that among criminals who ingested psilocybin, the recidivism rate dropped by 18 to 27%. Another study showed that, compared to a placebo, psilocybin increases emotional empathy by activating the 5-HT2A and 1A serotonin receptors. Except, that same study indicated that moral behavior remained unchanged. A point to consider. Change their ideas, and then, drop by drop, steer them toward the deconstruction of their worldview. Gradually, we will get there, targeting the head, the one responsible for this conflict. Otherwise, in the worst-case scenario, we will have tried. We will have followed the righteous path. We will have been free men. After all, you are either in one camp or the other. We are either conscripted or follow our ideal.
He knew it better than anyone. The power of psychotropics over the human mind is real, though often neglected and minimized due to sociological movements and political decisions, particularly after 1968 on the European continent. Sergei called his friend a psychonaut. Georgi would confide in him, describing in detail the adventures of his introspective experiences and psychic journeys. Visions, nightmares, hallucinations. These voyages proved revealing, leading to non-existent or hidden realities meant to remain abstract. Georgi recounted, for example, seeing a young girl whose gaze profoundly moved, almost physically, everything around her. When he crossed paths with her, The space seemed to fill with hope for an equitably happy, shared, and fulfilling future. Although she was undoubtedly a stranger on the surface, her presence felt familiar to Georgi's soul. He claimed to have found his sanctuary in her. One day, following a psilocybin meditation in the woods, Georgi experienced a recursive dream. He woke up in a narrow, cold place. His legs could not bend in any direction, his arms could barely reach his chest, and only his head could turn. The surface felt metallic, perhaps a morgue refrigeration cell? Yet no sound reached his ears. He was locked in a completely soundproofed, isolated rectangular box. Georgi came to think he was in a lead-lined coffin, welded shut. Tapping on the surface, he heard a dull thud. Had he already been buried? Dark, silent, and narrow. His despair was unparalleled. He closed his eyes and suddenly perceived the faint sound of waves on a beach, rolling in and out, like whispers reminding him of the immensity of beauty existing beyond this metallic prison. This sound, likely imagined, eventually lulled him to sleep. Then he woke up. Lying in his bed, sweating, a new idea flooded his mind. The consequences of using psilocybes went far beyond the few hours following their ingestion. These mushrooms were capable of transforming an entire life, long-term, at least through dreams of unprecedented perceptive depth, which haunt you, affect you, and shatter you. Georgi envisioned an infinite field of possibilities. To re-educate a corrupt person, a crooked politician, a propagandist journalist, to inflict upon them the very worst, tailored to their own measure. It would suffice to capture them, isolate them, and intoxicate them. In a calculated manner, of course. The proper dosage and appropriate guidance throughout their hallucinations would be necessary to achieve an optimal long-term effect. This idea might find its place in modern times, where traditional means of persuasion seemed powerless against the deep-rootedness of corruption and propaganda. Over time, his conviction spread to his two closest friends. Tailor-made hallucinatory experiences would humanize individuals with skewed moral compass, reconnect them with their profound humanity, with the very essence of their souls, and awaken within them compassion, conscience, and responsibility.
To humanize and open their eyes, that shall be our mission. Like the serpent who taught Eve the knowledge of her nakedness and urged her to cover herself.
Sergei brought the last glass of wine to his lips.
The serpent, an animal barely perceptible in nature and extremely dangerous for primitive man, the one who began to walk on two legs, to hunt, to farm, and to build civilizations. A primordial animal too, who lured with its words, who led to temptation, who revealed human mortality and breathed conscience into the heart of humanity. To survive, our ancestors had to learn to spot and flee these creatures. Our trio will make the inhuman human again. We will transfigure unconscious monsters into conscious beings, to do away with the corrupt and the abject populists, the obscene propagandists, the parasites and the scum who suck our blood, piss on us, and send us into tranches, who exploit us and then cast us aside. We will be the Beguiling Serpents.
That day, the flame of youth welded three people together, three friends, igniting the spirit of singular camaraderie and nourishing a blind hope. A bond forged over so many years could only withstand the trials and adversities that were tearing an entire nation apart.